What's going on, everybody? This is Afro Think Tank. There is nothing more wonderful than waking up in the morning, making my coffee the way I like it, turning on the TV, and watching Europeans scramble, complain, and cry about immigration. There's nothing more satisfying to me as a black man to turn on the TV and hear that France's economy is collapsing. There is nothing more pleasurable to me than when I turn on the TV and I see the French citizens rioting in the streets of France because France is forced to implement austerity measures, including eliminating holidays, because that's how desperate and poor they are when they're not allowed to steal from Africa. There's nothing more wonderful to think about than Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, countries that France and other European countries for decades called poor, third world countries, called the people vagabonds, pretended like their militaries were needed like Superman to go in to help them fight the terrorism that they've created themselves and sponsored and still sponsor. There's nothing more satisfying than to see France become what it's always been, a third world country full of savage barbarians who cannot lift themselves up from their bootstraps because they don't even have boots or straps. There is nothing more satisfying than to watch these smug-ass Europeans whose football team wouldn't be shit without Africans, whose French Foreign Legion, who they're so proud about, wouldn't be shit without Africans, whose standard military wouldn't be shit without Africans, whose food wouldn't have no fucking seasoning without Africans, whose entire culture wouldn't be cool without Africans, and whose language wouldn't sound sexy without an African speaking it. Is nothing more satisfying than watching one of the biggest colonizers fall before our eyes. There's nothing more satisfying. So when the truth is revealed, shown that France has no resources, France cannot produce or create anything, France does not manufacture anything, the only thing France can do is add value, intrinsic value to already finished goods that's already been made by other countries in Asia and mined in Africa. I love the fact that France can't even power itself without Africa. I love the fact that we are seeing that these people who hold themselves up so high in their white Wakandas, because that's what they created off the teat, off the blood of Africa. They created their white Wakandas. And I'm so glad that their white Wakanda is being destroyed by Namor, Black Namor. That they're being flooded with debt because they can't steal anymore. These fucking barbarian savages can't steal anymore because the black man decided to stand up. There's nothing more satisfying than that. And I'm also loving England go through the same. All of them are going through the same thing. But France in particular, all the things you did to Haiti, making Haiti pay y'all reparations because they kicked your ass, being the sponsors of Haiti's economic situation, I'm loving it. I'm going to enjoy every moment of France's decline. Now, the people themselves, I got no problem with the French people, even though I kind of, the white ones I do, the ones that's racist, the ones that perpetuate this shit, the ones that thought that they, in their white Wakanda, the ones that thought that everything France was about was due to France and their hard work, and their intellectual superiority. I'm glad they're all coming to the reckoning that they ain't shit and they ain't never gonna be shit. And in the future they won't be shit without Africa. They're gonna have to come begging now. They're gonna have to come begging now. And we'll see. We'll see. We'll see. When you prostrate low enough, long enough, hard enough, and mean it, Because this time we're paying attention. This time we're paying attention. Then we'll think about it. Anyway, enjoy this fall and the collapse of France. Tell me what you guys think in the comment section. Oh, by the way, and we're lining up for the rest of those cards because the UK's falling too. I'm enjoying that shit. I'm enjoying all the delectable European white Wakanda dishes that's on my plate. Anyway, tell me what y'all think in the comment section. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out.
The fundamental problem with it is that the European continent is bankrupt. It is resource light. It has virtually no natural resources. It required an empire to feed it on sweetheart terms with the energy that it needed, with the minerals and with the wherewithal for an industrial life like Germany once had, like Britain once had, but shorn of that empire, and the days of European empire are long gone. There are still some hangovers dotted around the place, but by and large, the European days of empire are gone. We have nothing except our added value skills, academic skills, medical skills, skills in various high-tech fields, but we can't even make a computer. We can't even make a mobile phone without Bolivia. We can't make a computer without the DRC, the Congo, and the rising powers will simply not allow us to reconstitute ourselves as a European empire. Assuming Britain, not a member of the EU, is regarded as being a part of that European empire, it will never fly. It will never go off the ground. It will be like the dodo, unable to fly, plump, and a very easy target for the new kids on the block.
France came to a standstill on Thursday as anger over the government's austerity plan spilled into the streets. Hundreds of thousands joined marches across the country, bringing metros, schools, and pharmacies to a halt. Unions staged more than 260 demonstrations nationwide. Police deployed in massive numbers, clashing with protesters in Paris, Marseille, and Lyon. Many accuse President Emmanuel Macron of enriching the wealthy while squeezing ordinary people.
Protests are sweeping France. Trade unions are uniting against planned cuts to wages, pensions and public services. Hundreds of thousands march against poverty, inequality and the struggles of low-paid workers.
I'm here to defend public services, to also demand more social justice and tax justice, in particular to demand in fact that public money goes back into public services in hospitals, justice and schools, rather than to large companies or in tax gifts to the ultra-rich.
The previous government under Prime Minister François Bayrou pushed for 44 billion euros in budget cuts. France's public debt has climbed above 3 trillion euros. A heavy burden on its economy. Bayrou lost a no-confidence vote after fierce opposition to his plan. Now, Sébastien Lecornu is in charge. But many fear the new Prime Minister will continue down the same path of spending cuts.
Globally, I can understand that there are some situations, in some domains, some professions, where there are salary problems. We all have demands. The problem is that it always impacts normal people. We are the ones affected when there are strikes. And it's not the government that will be affected.
As protests flare, France's Interior Minister warns police will show no leniency.
The instruction is to be highly responsive, mobile and proactive. Whenever there's damage, property damage or harm to individuals, we will be uncompromising and relentless.
His warning became reality. with riot police charging crowds and tear gas flooding the streets. Some protesters were also left seriously injured. Prime Minister Lecornu now has only weeks to present a new budget. If he fails, France faces more political turmoil. And for ordinary people, it means fresh uncertainty over jobs, wages and public services, as anger spills onto the streets.
DW correspondent Lisa Louis was out on the streets today and gave us this report.
It was quite a joyous event, I must say, like a giant street party with people chanting slogans, music playing, people dancing, people having sausages. And lots of protesters were telling us that they were here today in France to show their opposition to budget cuts put on the table by the now former Prime Minister François Bayrou, who was ousted in a confidence vote last week. But these protesters here today and across France fear that his measures could be maintained by the new Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, who's a close ally of President Macron's.
And the Prime Minister, the new one, has just weeks to deliver a new budget. Do people see him as a fresh start, really, or more of the same?
Well, he's supposed to deliver a fresh budget, or a new proposal, really, within a few weeks. He's really busy behind the scenes, we understand, negotiating with the different parties. But many protesters here were telling us we don't believe this is a U-turn. As I said, Sébastien Lecornu is seen as a close ally of President Macron. And the protesters believe that he will also try to impose cuts that will also, take away money from those who don't have much. Protesters here we're saying we need the government to tax the rich, to take away money from big companies, from those who have a lot of money, and not make cuts, for example, in the healthcare system. That was one thing that the former Prime Minister Bayrou had put on the table. He also wanted to carry out just another unemployment benefit reform, something measures that are very, very unpopular here in France. Many protesters believe that they need to stay on the barricades to prevent these measures from being put in place.
Yep, the prime ministers have come and gone. The one constant is Emmanuel Macron. How much of this anger is falling back on him?
Emmanuel Macron hasn't been very popular for a while now, but when you look at his popularity ratings right now, they're really, really very low. They're at about 17% according to the most recent polls. That is 17% of the people here in France having a positive opinion of him. That rating was at 24% just a few weeks back. So this really has had a large impact on his image here in France. When you look at the new Prime Minister's approval ratings, Sébastien Lecornu, he's not doing a lot better. He's standing at about 16% of positive opinions, and that's also very, very bad for a Prime Minister who just came into office. That new Prime Minister has to now find a new government, because for now we still have a caretaker government, pretty much the old team in place, and he also has to find a way to gather support for some measures to cut the budget, and he will have to cede ground to the left if he wants to stay in place and not face another vote or lose another vote of confidence like his predecessor.
That was Lisa Louis in Paris. Thank you so much for your reporting. Let's take a closer look at this and bring in journalist Cole Stangler. Cole, welcome back to DW. To set the scene for us, how disruptive have today's strikes and protests really been on the ground in France?
Yeah, they have been pretty disruptive. It sort of depends on where you are. But just to give you more of a sense of the figures here, we saw another day of protests 8 days ago. It was the Block Everything protest. Today's protests were actually bigger than those. So between 500,000 people and 1 million people, according to the police and trade unions, we saw strikes affect the civil service, so 12% of civil servants, 17% of school teachers, pharmacies here where I'm located in Marseille, in the south of France. We had pharmacies on strike. The metro system also affected, especially in Paris, the rail system, a little bit less so in Marseille, but nevertheless quite disruptive. And I think by any measure, we're seeing those numbers here from the trade unions. This was an increase from the protest last week we saw on the 10th. You have to go back really to the pension reform protests of 2023 to have similar numbers. So that hike in the retirement eligibility age from Emmanuel Macron from 62 to 64. We haven't seen these kind of protest numbers since then. It's a sign really of the opposition to the budget. It also shows you when the trade unions are actually united in France, the kind of mobilization they can have. We'll have to see what happens tomorrow when the unions meet again. They call this an ultimatum for the Prime Minister, Le Cornu, and they're waiting to see if he's going to make any significant concessions. And if not, we might expect to see future days of protests again.
But Cole, is this really about current budget proposals, or is it the pension reform you just mentioned and years of austerity really catching up with President Macron?
Yeah, so I think, if you want to break this down, we have really two dimensions here. We have an economic dimension, and we saw that reflected in the report that you just showed. There's lingering frustration over this budget proposal that was made by the predecessor of the prime minister here, François Bayrou, who was asking for cuts in welfare spending, cuts in hospitals, cuts in schools. And already French people are saying, well, wait a second, we're already seeing what they perceive as a decline in the quality of public services, because people in France, you have to remember, have pretty high expectations when it comes to public services, different than maybe some of the American audiences out there. People expect a lot from the state. So you have this frustration over the austerity, what they perceive as really an austerity budget. But we also have a pent-up political crisis. And I think that's the other important dimension we have to talk about here to understand why the protests were so significant. There's a sense that Macron, the president, and now for the third time has appointed a conservative prime minister that, according to a lot of the people out in the streets today, does not reflect what they voted for at the polls. Macron dissolved parliament last year. We had snap elections. And in those elections, we had the left-wing alliance win a plurality of seats, followed by the centrist party, followed by the far right. There was a sense after those elections, well, maybe Macron can name a center-left prime minister, if not a left-wing prime minister. And now we've seen three successive conservative prime ministers putting forth these budgets that are not just very unpopular, we see that, but also seem to lack a democratic mandate. So it's really these two things that are bound up. It's the economic proposals, but it's also the deeper kind of political democratic crisis that we're seeing in France.
Yeah, we heard Jean-Luc Mélenchon earlier in the show, the leftist leader. He called Macron the source of the chaos. Is that just rhetoric from the hard left, or does it truly reflect a wider feeling in France right now?
Yeah, there's a lot that Jean-Luc Mélenchon says that I think a lot of French people do not agree with. That's reflected in the polls on a number of different issues. However, on this point, Mélenchon does speak for a large section of the French population. And again, that's reflected in the polls. Polls show right now Emmanuel Macron has his lowest approval rating since being elected president, 17% according to an Ipsos poll just a couple of days ago. To give some perspective, I mean, that's lower than Keir Starmer, the pretty unpopular prime minister of the UK. It's even lower than, it's lower than Donald Trump, the historically unpopular president of the US. Macron's very unpopular, and people hold him responsible for this crisis. I want to make another point, and I want to be careful about how I frame this, but, on the international stage, Macron is often perceived as being in conflict with some of these kind of international strongmen. And there are major disagreements that Macron has with people like Donald Trump, with Erdogan, with Putin on issues like Ukraine, issues like Gaza. Of course, there are disagreements. Macron is going to announce the recognition of a Palestinian state, reportedly at the United Nations later this month. But on the domestic level, when it comes to domestic politics, Macron is increasingly perceived as a kind of strongman leader who is not listening to what French people have been saying. It's reflected in those three prime ministers he's appointed. We see it in the approval ratings that are really low. We see it in the polls that show majority of French people want him to step down. That's very unlikely. But there is a real sense that Macron is the one responsible here. So Mélenchon, the leftist leader you asked me about, says a lot of rhetoric, not always supportive. But in this particular case about Macron, the polls back up his point of view.
We only have about a minute left, but I want to look ahead. What would it take for Macron and Le Cornu to actually diffuse this crisis?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult question. I think they're wondering the same thing right now. So what they need to do is try to figure out a way to get the budget kind of across the finish line in the National Assembly. So how do you avoid a motion of no confidence coming from the far right? Okay, so they have to, if they want to, if they're going to not try to appease the far right, well, then you have to try to win over the socialists. And so the big question we're seeing emerge right now is, are they going to have a budget that's going to win the support of the socialists? Le Monde, the French newspaper of record, had an editorial today essentially begging the government to try to make a deal with the socialists. And so we're going to have to see how that plays out really in the coming weeks.
That was journalist Cole Stangler. Thank you so much for all those insights. Great speaking to you today.
Thank you.
Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! Free Sudan! Boycott diamonds and gold! We most definitely cannot forget about the people of Sudan.
Wait. Before you go, for all my subscribers and philanthropists out there, I'm building a solar power community water bowl system in Nigeria. It's going to cost between $5,000 and $6,000. I'm trying to raise money. If you want to participate and help me build this solar power water system, please donate to the Cash App and put solar water in the notes. Solar water in the notes. I'll put PayPal, Stripe, and Zelle. Anyway, thank you. That's all I gotta say. It's Afro Think Tank. Learn something, teach something. I'm out. Thanks for watching Afro Think Tank. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And follow me on Substack and Patreon for more content. Remember, it's Pan-Africanism or nothing.